Hi, grade 12 learners. My name is Mr. Remy Ngwenya, the history coordinator in the Gauteng province. Today I want to speak to you on how to look at information from sources in order for you to be able to answer questions. The paper of history is divided into two. We've got section A, which is an essay question, section A, which is a source-based question, and then section B is essay question. Now I want us to talk about section A, which helps us to analyze the sources. Many of us do not normally get high marks when it comes to source-based questions. It is because you do not comprehend or you do not understand what are sources and how should they be interpreted when they appear in the question paper. Now today I'm going to assist you to guide you as to how to go about interpreting information from the sources. Now, examiners are using different types of levels when source-based questions are to be interpreted. We've got three different kinds of levels or levels of questions according to the historical information and historical skill that one has to apply. We've got a level 1 question that contains of extraction of evidence from source or definition of historical concept. This level 1 question is the base that would make you to start collecting marks in as far as sources are concerned. This carries about 15 marks in the question paper. Now for you to get these 15 marks, one would explain what is it that you have to look at? What type of question do you have to know, and what question verbs must you look at in order to be able to answer the 15 marks question? We've got level 2 questions that talks to interpretation of information from sources and explaining information gathered from different sources. This contains about 20 marks, and it constitutes 40% of our work. Now, level 3 questions are the higher order questions. Now, the higher order questions also carries that 15 marks that I talked about, which is 30%. Now, in the higher order questions, you are requested to interpret information. You are requested to engage with sources, such as usefulness, reliability, bias, and limitations. You are also requested by the examiner in this level to compare and contrast information or on different kinds of sources. So what you need to know is that out of 50 marks, when you write the source-based section, which is a section A, you will have 15 marks of level 1 questions, which is 30%. You will have 20 marks, which constitute 40% on level 2, and then you will have another 15 marks for level 3 questions. Now, when you now go through your sources, or when you read through your sources, this is what now you need to know. Level 1 questions. What type of questions must I expect to obtain the 15 marks that I have just demonstrated? One, level 1 questions just want you to do simple thing: extract information. They want you to extract information from the source. Now, how do you extract information? You just read the source and you look for an alternative answer, just as you do in a comprehension passage. Now, when you do extraction, the answers are found in the source. If you see any level 1 question, it simply says to you, look for an answer in the source. You don't have to think it out. You don't have to sort of like look for it or interpret it. You just have to quote it from the source itself. Now, mostly the level 1 questions, they carry a maximum of 2 marks. They normally say 1 times 1. Once the question says 1 times 1, it means the answer is to be extracted from the source. Once you see 2 times 1, know that there are 2 things that I must take out from the source. The question verbs. Now, each and every level has its own question verbs. So the question verbs to extract information from the source are list, quote, identify, and name. Now, these question verbs are simple question verbs because remember, when you set a source-based question, we move from simple to complex. So the simple part is that you list according to the source, name according to the source, identify from the source, or give reasons from the source, or name 2 things from the source. So the level 1 questions simply wants you to obtain information from the source. This is one easier approach to passing the source-based questions. Once you get the 15 marks from the level 1, you are already at 30% in your response. So it means you are halfway through in passing the question that is out of 50. Remember, for learners to pass the paper out of 50, they need 15 marks. So the 15 marks has been provided to you in a form of level 1 questions through extraction, reading from the source, taking information from the source, naming from the source, quoting from the source. So these are the typical level 1 questions. The question may be, what information in the source tells you about the philosophy of Black consciousness, for an example? A question may say, quote 2 reasons from the source to prove that the Black consciousness influenced the 1976 riots. A question may say, what do you understand by the term Black consciousness? So these are the typical questions that you must expect every time you answer the level 1 questions in your source-based. So in the source, you have this 15 marks that is given to you. Level 2 questions. When we talk about level 2 questions, what type of questions are we referring to? Level 2 questions require you to interpret information. They require you to analyze. Now, when you interpret information, it means you are no longer using the source, but you are using the source and the knowledge that you have gained after studying the content. Level 2 questions does not require you to directly quote from the source because the source questions have been allocated the first 15 marks. When you look at level 2, it means now you must use the source and your thinking in order to answer the questions. Now, these questions, they carry about 4 marks in the question paper. They normally appear as like this, 2 times 2. Now, what are the question verbs that are used for level 2 questions? Question verbs are saying explain the concept, comment, describe, organize. Now, remember, you need to know and you need to master the level question verbs so that you know that when the question starts to say quote from the source, it's a level 1. When it says define, it's a level 1. But when it starts to say explain, the level has gone higher. It's a level 2. Therefore, the mark allocation must meet the level. Level 1 is 1 times 2, 2 times 1. But level 2, the mark allocation goes higher. So every time you answer the source-based question, it is important that you must look into the mark allocation. The other question verb may say comment on in as far as the source is concerned. It may say describe. It may say organize information. So these are the question verbs that are used for level 2 questions. Now, typical questions that you may discover in the past exam paper may say, what message does the cartoonist convey? Now, remember I said to you, the level 2 questions require you to interpret. Don't just look at the cartoon and say it says this, but you must interpret the message that you derived after looking at the cartoon. So it may also say, explain in your own words. Now, if you do not have content with you, if you do not have the study of that particular aspect or topic, like the Black consciousness, it might be difficult for you to explain in your own words because you must interpret the information. You must not just use sources as they are. You interpret. You look for evidence that will assist you to interpret information from the source using the question verbs that have been given to you. Explain in your own words, or a question might say, what do you think about the philosophy of Black consciousness? You need to interpret information. Now, level 3 questions. Level 3 questions require you to explain different perspectives. You look at things like drawing your own conclusion, coming up with your own understanding and conclusion about a particular historical event. You can use also reliability as a form of a question that will make you to interpret information. Remember now, we are moving from simple to complex. We started with level 1, we went to level 2, now we are going a level higher than the past 2 levels. Now, remember I said at the beginning in the table that this question also constitutes 30% and it is 15 marks. And most of the learners do not obtain the 15 marks in as far as level 3 questions are concerned. Now, what is it that you need to know in order to master level 3 questions? These questions also carry a maximum of 4 marks. When you look at the question paper, do not only focus on the question and the source. Another thing that you need to use is the mark allocation on your right-hand side towards the end. Now, you have 1 hour to answer a 50 marks question. Therefore, there are so many things that you need to check. You need to be looking at your sources, you need to be looking at the mark allocation, and you also need to be looking at various forms of questions, how they are phrased. So immediately you see a particular question verb and a mark allocation, you must know that this is now a level 1. This is just from the source. This is now a level 2. I must use the source and my information. This is now level 3. I must talk about different perspectives. Your usefulness, the limitation of a source, which are the verbs that we are going to discuss as the lesson progresses. Now, the question verbs that you find in level 3, you may be requested to compare information. Compare source 1A to 1B. You may get a question of contrast, wherein you look at the opposite, which is posed by the source. You can also find this one, which appears on both level 2 and level 3, commenting on, or how does the character in the source justify. So you will look into these question verbs. They are telling you that the question is higher than level 1 and level 2. It's a now level 3 question. You will find questions such as Explain to what extent the evidence in source 1A. Or you may find a question that says, compare evidence in source 1A and in source 1B. You may find a question that says, comment on the usefulness, a usefulness of a source, reliability in a source, limitations of information. So these are the three levels that you need to expect every time you write a history paper in as far as source-based questions are concerned. The 15 marks is divided into three levels: level 1, level 2, and level 3. Now let us look at the way in which question verbs are phrased so that you can be able to understand how do you respond if a question comes in this fashion. Now, remember when I started, I talked about every time you look at section A, source-based questions, you need to look at mark allocation. When you read the question, also look at the mark. Now, every time a mark says 1 times 2, everything that has a 1 on your left, it means the question is a level 1. It tells you that the answer is in the source. Once you see a 1 mark from the left in your mark allocation, it says to you 1 times 2, then know that there are 2 things that I must look for. Then it tells you the number of responses. If it says 2, it means 2 things. If it says 1, it means I need to give 1 response. So it is very much important to look at mark allocation, because sometimes you may give 1 response and yet you are needed to give 2. Then you lose marks. So it is important to say 1 times 2 means 1 times 2. It means I must give 2 responses in a form of 1 statement. Here I must give 2 responses in a form of 2 statements, which means here your answer will be just 1 bullet, which will allow you to get 2 marks. Here it will be 2 bullets. Your answer must give 2 bullets. It means 1 for the first mark and another for the first mark for you to get a 4 marks. Right. In level 1 questions, you may be required to give 3 responses from the source. Once the question says 3 times 1, it means you need to mention 3 things. Once the question says 2 times 2, it means you need to provide 2 things. So the mark on the left guides you as to how many forms of response must you provide when you answer the question. Right. Now, what does this all mark allocation means to us? The mark allocation simply means if 1 times 1 is equals to 1, it simply says the next number, this one, tells you the level in which the question is in. If the question is dash times 1, it means I'm needed to answer a level 1 question, and which is extraction. So anything times 1 is an extraction. Now, what is an extraction? Extraction means you go straight to the source and you find the answer. You don't have to think it out. It is given to you. It's in the source. So once you see times 1 times 1, anything times 1, it means it's an extraction. It's a guiding a principle that you need to go and look for an answer in the source. If you see a mark allocation that says 1 times 2, you go and look in the source first, then the answer might be there. Or look at the way the question it is phrased. It might be telling you to look in the source. The question verb might say, according to the source. Everything that says according to the source simply means the answer is found in the source. Your response is there. You read and understand the source quite well. and then you will find your answer. Once the question verb says according to the source, you don't have to dig in. You don't have to think it out. The answer has been provided for you. You all have to search for it and give your response. Right. If you see this one that says 2 times 2, know that the level is no longer according to the source. The level has gone higher. You must now interpret. It means you have to think the answer out. You cannot think the answer out if you do not have content. You need to have the background and the bullets to the interpretation of information that you have studied in class in order for you to answer this question. Because it requires you to interpret the information or analyze the information from the source. Analyzing means breaking down into particles. So you need to have learned your work in order for you to look at the source. Understanding what is being asked of you, and you apply your knowledge and understanding in order to answer the question. If you did not understand the content, it will be difficult for you to answer this type of a question because it needs your understanding. Therefore, learners must avoid in going to exams having not studied the content. They must not only rely on sources as they appear, they also need to use the knowledge that they have gained in the classroom in order to be able to interpret and to analyze, because this is now a higher order. The history as a subject of a skill, we move from simple to complex. We move from general to specific, and we move from the known to the unknown. So questions must be answered in the way they vary according to their levels, level 1, level 2, and level 3. For you to master source-based questions, you need to understand how these levels are tabled and how are they asked in the examination. Right. Now, these are the types of questions that you must expect when you look at the source-based question. You will find types of questions that talks to sources supporting each other, different sources. It might be a written source and a cartoon, or a written source and a photograph. Now, you might find a question that wants you to compare sources, whether the sources are talking the same language or whether the sources are contradicting each other or they are an opposite to one another. Examiners would use that skill of giving you sources to check if you will be able to compare them. Then we've got biasness of sources. Then we've got reliability in sources. We've got usefulness of sources, and we also have limitations. Now, I would explain to you what is meant by this as the lesson progresses. Now, the first part is support. How does source 1A support source 1B with regard to the philosophy of Black consciousness, for an example? Now, if a question comes in this fashion, says, how does a source support? What do you do? This question is asking you to look at things that are similar first, things that are the same, or things that are common, if you look for commonality. Then before you answer the question, there's something that you need to do that is very much important, because support is a 4 marks question. You need to be looking at 2 sources in order to provide an answer for 4 marks. What do you then do? You go to source 1A, right? You find something that is common or that is supported by source 1B. For an example, if you are comparing source 1A and 1B, you go to source 1A, you look for something that is common with source 1B, and then you underline it. In your answer then, you would say, source 1A says this, and it is supported by source 1B, which says this. Then it means you have done the first comparison. Remember, this is a 4 marks question. You have done the first comparison. Then you go back to the source again. Find another example that in the second source and the first source are common for another 2 marks. Remember, the comparison question is out of 4. You first answer for the first 2 marks, and you give the answer for another 2 marks for you to obtain 4 marks. So what does this simply mean? When you look for comparison, it means you are comparing apples with apples. You don't look for an apple and an orange and you link them together. But it's an apple in source 1A and an apple in source 1B for first 2 marks. An apple in source 1A and an apple in source 1B for another 2 marks, which makes it 4 all in all. In that case, you are in a position to obtain the 4 marks through the question on comparison or looking for similarity in sources. Right. Now, remember I talked about 2 forms of comparison. We compare things that are the same and we compare things that are different. Now, here we are going to be looking at apple and an orange, not apple to apple. Now here, what are you going to do? You have to find out what is it that is an opposite between the 2 sources. How do they contradict one another? How are the 2 sources being the contradicting each other or conflicting with each other? Right. So what do? You go first to the source and find something that is opposite, that is contradicted by the source. Then in your answer, you say source 1A says this, and this is contrasted. This is contrasted, or this is contradicted by source 1B, which says this. So then you go back again. You look for another example of differences. Then it means you have answered out of 4. The first bullet talks to the first contradiction for 2 marks. Another bullet talks to the second contradiction, which is also 2 marks. Right. Then there is a form of question that talks to bias. If a source is biased, what does this mean? A source that is biased is a source that poses one particular viewpoint. Let's say we are talking about communism and capitalism. A source may promote communism in a way that it influences people to go along with it. Then that particular source is biased because it looks at a particular view. So it is one person or country's opinion on a particular matter. So a biased source is also in a form of a limited view. It is limited because it focuses on a particular. It is not broad or it is not versatile. So it looks at a particular concept or ideology. And then in that case, we call that source biased. Then we also have questions on reliability. If we want to know what reliability covers, we then have to understand 2 questions that we need to know: whether the source is reliable or it is not. Remember, a source has to be reliable for us to make use of it. Then, if the source is reliable, is it accurate? Is it exactly what transpired or exactly what happened? If a source is reliable, can the source be trusted? Can I trust that the source is about this event? If your answer to this is yes, then we can say the source is reliable because it talks to this or because it covers this portion, because it relates to the impact of Black consciousness, for an example. Now, what is it that you look for if you want to know if the source is accurate? You need to know who wrote the source. when was the source written? And why was the source created? To promote something, right? Is the evidence in the source consistent? Which means it must be consistent for the source to be reliable. It must not change. If it keeps on changing, then that source can be termed unreliable. Right, then we've got what we call usefulness in sources. Usefulness in sources, it depends on the purpose of the source. For you to be able to use anything, you must have a purpose. There's a purpose for a pen, there's a purpose for a cup, there's a purpose for a table, there's a purpose for a board. Now, if you want to know if the source is useful, what is it that you have to look at? You also look at the accuracy of the source if it is around the historical event. Does the source means what it says? Can the source be corroborated? If a source has been corroborated, it means it has been tampered with. It cannot be then useful to the historian because it has been tampered with. And we also have to know who produced the source, because we have to know who wrote it so that we can make use of it in times of the historical event. Focus on the message of the source. Assess whether the information in the source can be used for that particular period. If we are studying a topic on Black consciousness and the philosophy of Black consciousness, and the source does not relate to anything around Black consciousness, that particular source is not useful to a historian studying the event on Black consciousness. So it is important that we know how these sources are formulated. We looked at reliability, we look at limitation in a source, we look at bias, then we look at usefulness. We then have to look at how these sources can be compared one to another in investigating the past. Now, as I said to you, limitation, these kind of questions, they point to the quality of a source. If a source is focusing on a particular event and not being broad, then that source is limited. So you will be looking at things like bias, reliability, and then you point to you the direction whether the source will be useful or not. So if you don't have contextualization, if you don't know who wrote the source, if you don't know why was the source written, if you don't know when was the source written, then that source cannot be useful. That source cannot be reliable. That source has limitation, and that source is biased. Now, for an example, the source may be limited because it only presents one side of a particular view. Let's say, for an example, we talk about two concepts. The concept of the Cold War, where we talk about capitalism and communism. If a source focuses only on communism, it is limited because it has not covered the other part of the ideology, where we have to study about the two concepts. So the source may be limited because it is not accurate again. If the source keeps on changing, then that source has limitations, and it is therefore not reliable. We cannot rely on a source that is highly limited. Right. When you write the source-based questions, you will come across what we call a paragraph question, which is 8 marks. Now, what do you do here? In a paragraph question, it means you are going to read all your sources based on the key question. And then you start looking at the responses from the sources in order to write a paragraph. Now, a paragraph is assessed in a holistic manner. It means you have to write your points and arrange them. The question is phrased so that it is in a form of a level 3 question. Do you still remember what I said about the level 3 questions? A level 3 question requires you to analyze, to interpret, to organize information in order to make a meaningful whole. For an example, explain the role of a black consciousness in the 1976 riots. Or the question may say, explain the impact. Or it may say, what are the causes or the significance of an event? So therefore, the learner must use source 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D to give an answer. You organize information. This is a level 3 question. So the paragraph question always relates back to the key question every time. So a question might say, using the information from the relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph explaining the significance of or explaining the causes. Now, here you need to use all your sources. You need to use your information, because here you do not only use sources as they are, but you interpret information in answering the paragraph question. Now, read through all the sources and you must underline the relevant facts. For you to answer the paragraph, you need to underline the relevant facts. And then you transfer these facts into a form of a clean page before you respond to the question paper as a form of brainstorming or planning your answer. Remember the other content that relates to the question. Remember, I said to you, if you don't have content, it will be difficult for you to answer level 2 and level 3 questions. You need to have content, right? This will become your own knowledge as part of your answer. Remember, you have to include your own knowledge to show that you have an understanding of the topic. When you answer the paragraph, don't use sources only. Interpret the sources and information by providing your own evidence. Remember, when you answer the paragraph, you need to reference your sources. You reference your sources so that the one who marks will see that you have made use of your sources. You do not have to say in source 1A, Kennedy said. All you need to do is write down the relevant information, and then after, you put the relevant source in brackets, like source 1A. This will help you to know that you have made references. You have used the sources. Do not write more than a quarter of a page to 1 page to write a paragraph. All you need to do is to look at the sources and respond to the question relevant to the way it has been posed. You don't have to write 2 to 3 pages. You look for the alternative answers so that you don't waste time. Right. Now, these are the structures of how the questions are phrased in history. In the past question papers that you will collate, this is what you must look for. The question paper will have this format of question numbers. It may say 1.1.1, 1.1.2, just as in this format. Then, all level 1 questions, as I said to you, they always have the number 1 in them. Then it means, therefore, these are level 1s. They have 1 times 2, 1 times 3, 1 times 4. Everything that has a 1 on your left tells you that the answer is according to the source. Give 2 reasons. Identify, list, as I said. Then the level 2 questions, always it's a 4 marks. It's 2 times 2. Explain, comment how. These are the question verbs that you must know. Level 3 questions they also have comment, compare, usefulness, reliability, and justification of a source. These are question 2 structure. The structure is the same as that of question 1. All you have to do is to look at the mark allocation, which tells you that this question is in this level. If a question is in level 1, you will see by the mark allocation. If the question is in level 2, you will see also through by the mark allocation. So all questions structured in the way that it gives you the 14 marks for a level 1, which is almost 30%. It gives you another 20 marks, and then it gives you another 30%, which is another 15 marks. Right. These are the question structures. We do understand them. Now, remember what I said to you. Remember what I said to you. As source-based questions are out of 50 marks. For you to get the 50 marks, because it is possible to get the 50 marks, you need to know how questions are phrased, as according to the cognitive levels. Level 1 is a pure 15 marks that is given to you because the answer is in the source. You don't have to go anywhere. And for you to pass the question out of 50, you need 15 marks, which is 30%. In that case, if you have answered all your level 1 questions, then you already have the 30% pass on the paper. Level 2 questions want you to look at the source and your knowledge. If you have not studied the content, you don't have your knowledge. You can therefore not get level 2 marks in a way you are supposed to, because you only have the source without the knowledge. So level 2 wants you to use your source and your knowledge in order to answer, because you have to interpret. Level 3 questions, you need to evaluate information. Now, learners, if you can be able to understand these 3 levels, there's no way that you can fail the source-based questions out of 50 marks. It's also very much possible to obtain a 50 marks if you apply the skills that I have just shared with you. All you have to do is to look at your question paper, the past exam papers. Check if what I have said is not there. Then you make notes of the question verbs that I have just shown you. You then must make use of them to try and practice answering the questions as according to their levels. For level 1 is a simple and straightforward thing. Answers are from the source. What? According to the source. Name according to the source. List according to the source. Quote from the source. That one, learners, is given to you. We must all get that 15 marks because it is in our hands. Level 2, you have to study and know your content. Both level 2 and level 3, to be able to answer the paragraph question, which is out of 80 marks. With that, my learners, there's nothing that is impossible. If you follow what we are saying in guiding you how to obtain good marks in source-based question, do likewise and follow these skills. You will never go wrong. With that, my learners, keep safe, study your work, get your past question papers, look at how sources are to be answered, apply the skills that I have just shared with you. You will never go wrong. With that, thank you.